Hi and welcome to Encouraging Your Learners to Speak in Class. This is the December 2011 webinar from elttraining.com, so I hope you enjoy it. This is aimed at teachers who are relatively new to the game, so if you're an experienced teacher you might find that a lot of what I say is probably fairly commonsensical, I hope. Hopefully if you're a fairly novice English teacher, then some of this will be helpful for you. So we'll start really with looking at why speaking in class is important. This may seem quite obvious to you, but I think it is worth considering that learning a language is a very practical skill, in the same way that learning to drive, learning to walk as a child, learning to swim, these things require practice. So clearly there's something of the cognitive, there's something of the you need to understand how things work, but there's a lot of you just need to do it again and again and again until you get it right. I often tell my trainees it's like standing on your head. I can teach you how to stand on your head very simply. Head on the ground, arms either side, legs in the air. That's it. But clearly, me giving those very clear instructions and you knowing very clearly how to do it won't make it easy until you've done it multiple times and fallen over. And you can see in these pictures, I think they're quite useful in that they show that support is a necessary part of the process. So that might be support in terms of either swimming here and non-human support, or in terms of a teacher. But support is necessary, but ultimately you do have to do it yourself, and this is why it's really important to do lots of speaking in class. If you're teaching learners who are in an English speaking country, then clearly they do have a lot of opportunity outside to practice, although it's often the case that people don't find it all that easy to mix with English speaking people. But if you're teaching in a country where their L1 is spoken, then learners probably only have a chance to practice their spoken English in class, which makes it doubly important to make sure they do get some opportunity to speak then. I think as teachers we're often very quick to blame ourselves, and if we get classes that aren't very responsive, we tend to instantly jump to the conclusion that it must be me. That of course might be true, but it's certainly the case that some classes seem to be easier to motivate than others. A class I'm currently teaching, pre-intermediate adults from a wide range of nationalities, are just fantastic. They will grab at anything and talk for England, and they're really keen. I've had lots of other classes in the past where people have been much more reticent or shy or embarrassed, or just quiet. And so, these people can be more difficult to motivate, and classes often take on a particular atmosphere. But this is, I think, within limits at least, changeable. If you've got very quiet students, it will be difficult to motivate them, more difficult to motivate them, but it's not impossible. So I think to some extent, they share the responsibility for speaking, but clearly you as the teacher have a major part to play in this too. As I said, the main thing to think is that it might not all be to do with you, but you are the person who has the opportunity to make things different. So your question really is exactly this one. What can you do about it? How can you change the situation? I think one of the first questions to ask yourself is this one. Are you doing all of the talking? This is a really common problem with teachers in class. Now, it's not a sin to talk in class. I think within teacher training we often emphasise the student talking over the teacher talking, and that's right and proper. But sometimes trainees go away with the impression that teacher talk is a bad thing. That's not true. I think these pictures show clearly learners who are motivated and engaged and teachers who are motivating and engaging. At some point you are going to have to be the teacher at the front of the class and tell them something, but it's really important to make sure that that doesn't dominate the class, that you don't jump in when the silence starts. That's another easy trap to fall into. They're a bit quiet, so you fill in. It can be quite helpful to record yourself once in a while. If you use a little handheld dictaphone or your phone, actually, most phones have a voice recorder on them nowadays, so you can just use your phone and record a part of your lesson, maybe half an hour somewhere, and just listen back, and you might be surprised at how much talk you do. And clearly if you're talking they can't be, so that is worth thinking about, I think, before you start thinking about other things. I'm sure your classes don't look like this, but this clearly is the result. If the teacher's at the front and talking and the learners are not engaged, then it's easy for this to be the result. So the first thing to think about clearly is establishing the right atmosphere. I suspect that the teacher in this class doesn't have a lot of interaction from her learners. Clearly in large classes, especially of younger children, possibly even more so of teenagers, there is an issue of discipline and having to balance that with learners interacting with each other. But I think particularly if you're talking about adult learning, the discipline issue shouldn't be a major problem, and having people sitting in rows in this nature, in this way, is not maybe very helpful towards getting them speaking to each other, because they can't even see each other. You might think, well, my furniture's not very conducive to this. In this classroom, for example, I think you could probably turn half the tables round and join them with their neighbour behind, and in that way at least have pairs, for example, or maybe fours. So, you know, feeling it's really all right to move the furniture around for a bit. The classic horseshoe thing, which is in most adult situations, we often have this horseshoe, which is a nice arrangement, but again, doesn't always have to be like that. So I think moving things around and changing things often help people to mix with different learners, maybe, and you know, enables them maybe to try different things, and this may help. Making it easy is a really important rule, I think. So when you are asking learners to do freer fluency practice, you want it to be in a situation where they feel relatively comfortable. Now, there are a few things that you can do to help this. One is to scaffold things for them. So, for example, if you're asking them to do a particular kind of task, let's say a role play, then you might give them a model role play to start with, a dialogue that they read together, or at least the beginning of the role play in that way, so that they've got something to start with before you ask for freer practice. So this kind of scaffolding, clearly at lower levels you'll need more scaffolding, and at higher levels they should be able to do without it. But I think it's worth feeling that it's okay to give them support, and that the ones who don't need it will, you know, should be free not to use it if they don't want to, but that it will be helpful, particularly for your weaker learners. The other thing that you can do is to provide vocabulary that's useful and particular structures. This, I don't mean necessarily here just, I don't know, the simple past tense for telling stories, for example, although clearly that would be helpful. But thinking also particularly about how we speak and the kind of structures that are used within speech. So this might include things like fillers, the ums and the ahs, because these are culturally bound and aren't necessarily universal. The other thing is things like how we start a story. For example, if you're telling a story, an anecdote, it usually starts with, oh, yeah, did I tell you about, or you'll never guess what happened to me the other day, or oh, that reminds me of. So those kind of conversation gambits, there's a really good book called Conversation Gambits, it's rather old now, that's full of that kind of stuff. Those kind of speaking discourse structures can be really helpful for learners. The other thing is pitch it a little bit below what is comfortable for them. So make it easy. Don't make it too difficult. Don't ask them for things that they can't do, because your aim here is to ensure that they can practice the language. We're not necessarily teaching something new here, we're thinking about practicing and using what they already know. It's that forging the links between the cognitive frontal brain, if you like, and the mouth. It's that kind of thing which needs to be done repeatedly in order to get the speed up. Using music can help sometimes, especially if you've got a small class where people are very aware of their own voices. So if they can hear themselves speak in what seems like quite a quiet room, then that tends to discourage them speaking, or tends to make them speak quite quietly. So you could try playing a bit of background music so that it's not so, I don't feel so self-conscious, perhaps. That can work quite well. Moving is also a good thing, I think, for the same sort of reasons. It gets people, lowers people's inhibitions perhaps if they're up and mingling and can hear other people speaking around them. Then activities that involve them saying a similar thing to multiple different people can be really helpful. This could be things clearly like surveys, or if you ask questions, get them to ask different people, or find someone who, these kind of things where they're very set tasks, but it does involve them standing up and moving around a bit. Again, the furniture that you have in the room and the way it's set up will mean that this is easier or more difficult, so that's something else to consider perhaps. Dictation can be a really useful tool for getting learners to speak. It absolutely doesn't just have to be about the teachers at the front of the class and speaking and the rest of the class are writing something down, which clearly involves no speaking at all on the part of the learners. But if your dictation involves learners dictating to other learners, then that involves a fair amount of speaking, at least 50% of the class speaking at any one time. This can be really useful for pronunciation work. Clearly they have to be understood by their partner. Can also obviously have the normal benefits that dictation has of writing skills and spelling and that kind of thing. But it doesn't, as I say, just have to be about learners sitting down writing. Another example, a really nice example for getting learners who are a bit inhibited to speak and to make a bit more noise is a shouting dictation. The way that this works is that you have a text. Ideally, what you want is a text which is split into two on alternate sentences. So learner A has sentence 1, learner B has sentence 2, learner A has sentence 3, etc. Within a text which has, you know, normal